Hi, everyone, and welcome to the QuitCast. My name is Becca. Today, we're going to kick off a series that's going to support the new Dear Writer book that's coming out. It's called Dear Writer, Are You Intuitive? It unfortunately is not anywhere in this room because we haven't ordered the cover yet for the posters, but it will be up soon. But the purpose of this book is to talk to writers who are intuitive, which, as we've found over the course of coaching for just almost a decade at this point, coaching writers, it is less commonly the subject of author advice, author nonfiction, and just general author discussion. Almost always intuitive authors go looking for fixes to the way intuition makes them feel, because it doesn't feel great sometimes to have an intuitive wiring. We're going to talk about what that means in a second. But the primary reason we're writing this book, Susan and I are writing this together, and the primary reason we're writing this book is because we don't see a representation of intuitive writing information out there, especially because a lot of intuitive writers are also what we would call discovery writers and or pantsers. And so much of the information that's out there about pantsing is trying to help pantsers become plotters. Or if we're trying to help you pants, like help you plot as a pantser or help you pants, what we're essentially trying to do is unwire some of the intuitive writing wiring that's happening in your brain already. So the goal of this series is to talk a little more about what that intuitive wiring looks like, why we have it. That's the key. Why we have these things is so important. And then to just provide some topics for us to think about before the book comes out. Because my hope with the book is that whatever questions we raise in the QuitCast that we are not able to answer, because we only have about 20 minutes to do these episodes, will be answered in the book. And so that's the hope. That's the goal. We definitely are going to continue making content about intuitive writing in the future. And so I hope this is helpful. Where we're going to start off today, because one of the things we've been doing for the launch is doing some TikToks and Instagram reels that are very short form. And the one that was on my list to wake up and do today was about overwhelm, because this is something that happens to intuitive authors on a fairly regular basis. And it actually helps me to explain what intuition looks like internally by talking directly about overwhelm. So that's where we're going to start today. So everyone who has felt overwhelmed in the past, and again, not all overwhelm is from intuition. So we're going to try to break apart how to differentiate those things. But everyone who's felt overwhelmed in the past understands that feeling of knowing that your brain is full or done and not understanding why it happened or how it happened. So the reason that overwhelm happens to intuitive authors specifically is because intuition is a very fast gathering of data and a making of connections between those data points, and then making meaning out of those connections. So filling in the holes and then making meaning out of that filling. What happens is you are very, very quickly processing a lot of data around you. And then because you're watching for patterns, often either emotional patterns, intellectual patterns, physical patterns, there are other types, which we'll talk more about those in the books, but those are the three primary ones I want to talk about today, because that data is accessible to you. So it feels like you should be conscious of it, but you are not conscious of it. There is not a way to separate out and become conscious of every single thing that you're taking in that's making you make this intuitive assumption about something. Usually what happens with people who are highly intuitive is they say things like, I just know, I don't understand how I came to this decision. I just felt like I had to make it. And because we use feel words a lot, like we say, I just felt like this was what I had to do. It feels to us, and now I'm even conscious of using the word feel, but it feels to us like there's something wrong with that decision-making process, because we instinctively, especially, and again, I try not to do this, but I just can't not go all the way back to the Enlightenment, right? Like once we get into post-Enlightenment thinking, rationalism, deconstruction, all of these things where there is more need for us to prove things because the structures of the way that things existed before, when everyone was just assuming that we all understood things the same way, or we all knew everything, or there was one way to do things or whatever. Now that that's not the case anymore, all of a sudden, this whole I just know feels very anti-rational. It feels very anti-logical, even though it is not any of those things. It still is based very much on data and on logic and on pattern watching. It just is happening faster than we are able to understand because it happens very quickly. And because we often can't explain exactly point A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like how did I get to that place? A lot of us who are highly intuitive have learned to either hold back what we say or hold back on that feeling of certainty, not feel as certain as we could about a particular decision because it feels like the right choice and not it is the right choice. And because we differentiate between those things and we talk ourselves often out of feeling more certain about our intuition, even when we are proven right over and over again. But we can't always make those connections explicit to people. So we often have the issue of not trusting ourselves or not trusting our own intuition, which makes us feel less certain. So then part of the reason we get overwhelmed is because our brain is really meant to reach certainty on less information. So when you have strengths, for instance, that are extremely intuitive, and we'll talk about a few of them, that overwhelm can happen because you are used to wanting to think about things to have certainty. For instance, if you're in election, you are used to making very quick assumptions about patterns if you're high strategic or high ideation. You are used to gathering a lot of data if you're context, if you're input, if you're analytical. You are used to having that ability to like take things in or sort things or however that works for you. But when you have those particular thinking strengths, and you are used to thinking in order to reach certainty, then there are certain thresholds that you have to pass about certainty before you can move those thoughts off into other places. And where the overwhelm comes from is either I'm trying to make something explicit, I'm trying to make a pattern explicit that I can only sense in my intuition. I can't actually give you the A, B, C, D, E, F, G data because I don't have it access to it yet. It's still subconscious. So that's one potential source of overwhelm. Another source of overwhelm is that with something like intellection, I think learner could be like this. At sometimes context is like this as well, or analytical, where you want to get to certainty, like you want to know for sure what's going on or feel certain about something. But the problem is that you need to go from that uncertainty place to the certainty place. And in order to do that, you have to use that strength to get there. So if it's intellection, you're thinking over and over and over something. If it's analytical, you're gathering data and analyzing this data. If it's context, you're trying to figure out and ask questions of the entire environment and figure everything out. You're filling in places that you don't know yet based on patterns that you have seen before. The high input is gathering a lot and trying to put everything in the right place, kind of trying to sort everything into the places where they belong. So the more that you're using that particular strength to get to that certainty spot, however you're getting there, the more time it takes to get you to that place. And so if you have any kind of either external environment pushing you towards certainty, or if you have any kind of internal, like an activator, a command, or something that's really pushing you, achiever, sometimes focus, pushing you, trying to get you to certainty faster, but you need all of this time to think or process or analyze or gather, and you're not able to get that in the moment because there's something else pushing at you to get to certainty faster, then that creates overwhelm. So overwhelm happens when there's an imbalance, essentially, of either within election, too many uncertain thoughts on the train track. That's what I talked about in the TikTok this morning. Too many uncertain thoughts on the train tracks, and then we have to deal with that a certain way. The analytical, there's not enough data, or the data we have can't be trusted, or there's incomplete data. If it's high context, there are things that we just don't know answers to. There are things that we haven't seen patterns of before, that they're brand new for us, right? If we're high in input, there's too much information available and we can't take everything in and categorize it and process it and make decisions because there's just too much information. And we hit those overwhelm points. Whatever the thinking is that we're using to get from uncertainty to certainty, we hit the overwhelm when either there's too much to do, too many thought trains on the train tracks, they're full. You can't move anymore on until you get some to certainty. Or like I said, with analytical, not enough data or incomplete data or faulty data. Like once you realize that a source that you were gathering data from is faulty or that you can't trust it, that can cause analytical overwhelm. Input overwhelm is often that there's just too much information out there. And every time I keep getting new information thrown at me, I want to go after everything and I know I can't. And I have a hard time prioritizing, right? So there are all these potential spots of overwhelm because the way that our thinking strengths are wired to get us to certainty by using the thinking strengths. And if we're not in our most efficient or effective way of applying those thinking strengths to a particular issue, then we get into overwhelm. And what happens is we get into that freeze moment of like, I don't know what to do here. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this particular video and talking about why overwhelm happens is because if you can know what it is that's causing that, you look for the causes that you have, the strengths that you have that I've talked about, you look for the behaviors that you do consistently that have made you get overwhelmed in the past. And then we try to go after those behaviors. So it might be shutting down the internet, stopping going on Facebook. It might be finding a new source of information. It might be releasing old sources of information. It might be stopping listening to a podcast or a YouTube or whoever. It might be stopping going to a conference. It might be stopping listening to the QuitCast, right? Like there are so many potential options that would help your overwhelm to go away if you felt like you understood why what was overwhelming you and how to fix it. So when you're looking at how to fix that intuitive overwhelm, it's really important to know that the reason the overwhelm happens in the first place is that our intuitive brains are really meant to be able to process a lot of information without us being conscious of it. So the more conscious we try to be sometimes, and the more we don't just let ourselves do what we're naturally going to do, the more overwhelmed we might get because we're bringing too much consciousness to a process that really needs to just be in the back of our head. Like we need to just walk away from the computer and let ourselves think about it. Or we need to just go call a friend who's really analytical and smart and talk to them about how to make this decision. Or we need to go and look for other patterns in the past or talk to more people or get a new source of input. Or again, with the strength of input, capital I input, narrow sources of input sometimes because we're taking too much in and we're starting to get overwhelmed by all the information that there is. And in general, being overwhelmed by all the information you could potentially take in happens to a lot of strengths, not just input. It can happen to strategic, context, input, intellection especially, learner, analytical, it can happen to almost any thinking strength, because what's happening to that information inside of our brains is it's getting processed somehow. And there is a finite amount of information that we can take in and process. And some of us who are really high in input, that's a high threshold. Like you may have just so much more information than you can take in and process. And that's okay, but you still have a threshold where you will get overwhelmed. So again, the hard part about this discussion is that if you have 5 or 6 of the thinking strengths in your top 10 that we've been discussing, there's a good chance that the overwhelm could be coming from multiple places. But the good news is that there are often fixes that are very quick And I feel like the two that I'm the biggest fan of have to do with how you're utilizing your physical space. So the first thing is, don't have multiple sources of information input in front of you at the same time if you tend to get overwhelmed a lot. Because the more you have that feeling of, I could just go to one more place, I could just look at one more thing, I could keep scrolling, et cetera, the more likely that is to not actually fix the problem. It's actually creating more problems the more input you have. This is why we often encourage writers to write with their phone in the other room, or to put your phone in the drawer overnight and not reach for your phone in the morning, so you can have as little information coming at you as possible, and you have a chance to use more of those strengths to reach certainty about things like, what am I going to write today, or where are my characters in this story, or something like that. The second thing I like to encourage for overwhelm is handwriting, like physically getting out a journal and handwriting. And if you're not a handwriter, what can substitute for this sometimes in a pinch is talking to someone. So if you're not doing one of those things, what we'll find almost always with people who get overwhelmed is that if it doesn't work for them to step back and stop taking in more information and go find certainty about other things that they need to be, like moving to the uncertainty station. For instance, some of you haven't done your taxes yet, and you're getting overwhelmed very quickly because the taxes and all of the requisite things are taking up train tracks in your head. It becomes much more difficult to process other things when there's a part of my brain that still is caught up in all of this, like, I'm not doing my taxes, I'm not doing my taxes. And I know that it's easy to say from the outside that it will actually get better if you move those trains to the certainty station. But some of us have a lot of baggage and fear around doing taxes. And so there is definitely some overwhelm that can be happening, and we can be avoiding things because that overwhelm has the potential to just like crawl up and like come up in our face and, stop us completely. And that is not a fun feeling. And I know a lot of us feel very stupid and awkward and awful when we get overwhelmed. And part of the reason I wanted to start in this place with this video is to say that the most normal intuitive brain thing ever is overwhelm. And overwhelm is not a sign that you're not equipped for stuff. It's not a sign that you're stupid or that there's something wrong with you. It's literally just a sign that we live in a world where there's too much coming at us all the time for us to process. And we need to be able to take a step back, and we need to move some thought trains to the certainty station, and we need to get some to-do list items off of our plate. And then honestly, we need to really think about how we are letting input come into our life and create overwhelm for us. Because there's nothing quite like the overwhelm that you'll feel when you feel like you should be doing something that you're not, especially if you're not capable of doing it. And that overwhelm, again, is a different type. That's not necessarily about intuition. And I wanted to address the intuitive stuff first, because we're preparing for this book. But specifically, when we're talking about how do I get overwhelmed, how do I handle overwhelm, I really want everyone to consider limiting the inputs that you get. And if that means you don't listen to the QuitCast anymore, then that means you don't listen to the QuitCast anymore. But I really want us to consider narrowing inputs and embracing the fact that we're going to miss out on stuff. And this is one of the reasons that we were encouraging people to read 4,000 Weeks. And again, like that book had some issues. I'm not saying it's the answer to everything, but there definitely was some benefit to kind of facing that reality that we are going to miss out on a lot of stuff. And so we need to embrace that knowledge that we're going to miss out, because that fear of missing out is part of what's causing the overwhelm. Because I'm afraid that if I don't listen to all the podcasts or watch all the YouTube videos, that I'm going to miss the magic bullet that's going to come and solve all of my problems and make everything better. And the bad news, I mean, I know I say there is no magic bullet often enough that everybody is getting tired of me saying that. But the reason I keep repeating it is because it is that belief that the magic bullet exists that is causing us to get overwhelmed and to lose time searching for things that are not going to solve problems, when what we need to do is move some thought trains to the certainty station. What we need to do is check off some to-do list items and get those out of our brain so we're not thinking about them anymore. What we need to do is put the phone in the drawer and stop getting on TikTok or Instagram. And again, this is part of why I hadn't done TikTok and Instagram and all those things on the level that you're supposed to do them on, because I don't want to encourage anybody else to be on there any more than I want to be on there. And it was a struggle for me to decide to do it just for this book release, because I don't like the feeling. It's 8:30 in the morning and I already feel like, because I have been on all these social media channels already this morning, that I'm not going to be able to get the work done that I want to get done, because I am extremely susceptible as a number one input to that feeling of, let me just do this for another minute. Let me just do this. Let's just scroll again. Let's just see. Let's just, because my input is so on point and so hungry. And so I need to know how to discipline that input. And there's a good chance that I may not continue to do TikToks for this entire release. I may not continue to do reels. I may not continue to put up QuitCasts, every single week. I may not put out newsletters every week, because I don't like the feeling of overwhelming people with input any more than I like feeling overwhelmed. So part of the reason that I'm going to try this is because I do want to try to give some actionable advice to people and to say, like, here's what I think you should do. And please do not go to TikTok to watch the TikToks that I did. Please do not go to Instagram to watch the reels that I did. They're the same. It's the same information you're getting in this QuitCast. The fear of missing out is driving us into overwhelm, and it is creating a situation where we can't disconnect from anything because we're so afraid that we're not going to get what we want. And so part of the disconnection of the overwhelm is acknowledging that there are going to be things that we're not going to get. There absolutely are going to be places that we're going to miss out. But I really believe that it's more beneficial for us to miss out, not just for myself, not just because I see the benefits for my own writing, but because when we coach people and they do cull their inputs, they do take uncertainty trains to certainty, they end up feeling better and writing more and being happier anyway. And all of the gimmicks and everything that is, are we going to miss out on all of this stuff? It's a good thing sometimes for us to miss out on stuff, because it helps us to have more focus and more efficiency. And it helps us not to get overwhelmed as easily, because there really is only a finite amount of stuff that we can do. And there's only a finite amount of information that we can take in and process and act on. And so I want to see us all as a way of both helping with our intuitive overwhelm and also as a way of taking care of our strengths. I want to see us all do everything we can to protect that input, intellection, analytical, context, futuristic, right? Like ideation, strategic. I want to see us protect those thinking strengths by being as judicious as we can about what we take in, what we start new, what we learn, what we input, especially things that over time are not helping us, but we keep doing it because everybody does it. So those are the things that I want you to go after today in terms of overwhelm. And if you are feeling consistently overwhelmed, like just all the time overwhelmed, because let's face it, the last 2 years, a lot of us are feeling consistently overwhelmed. I want you to consider not reaching for your phone in the morning. I want you to consider not getting on social media or YouTube or podcasts or anything for as long as you can in the morning, as long as you can in the day. And I want you to consider whether or not there are sources of information that you need to stop going to. And if that's us, then I'm so sorry to see you go, but I completely understand. And we will see you somewhere else, somewhere down the line. I have no doubt. But not everything is for everyone at every time. And that's part of why we get so overwhelmed, is that there just is too much coming at us, and everyone wants our attention and everyone wants something from us. And we really need to get better at narrowing and releasing and letting go and missing out. Like, I want us to be so good at missing out on stuff that we're so convinced we're going to find the thing that we need to be doing, or that we're already doing the thing, we just haven't hit that place yet, that we let ourselves just not know everything, not be on the inside of everything, not go everywhere. So again, this discussion about intuition is going to be a long one, in terms of, like, we're going to have multiple more, things to say about intuition. And obviously we're writing the book, so there's a lot to say. But I do want to encourage you today that if you are overwhelmed, that there are ways to fix the overwhelm. There definitely are. And of course, if you have ever been to therapy like CBT or DBT, and you have overwhelm from like anxiety and things like that, that's a completely different place. And I'm hopeful, because I love the fact that CBT and DBT are very skills oriented. And so hopefully there are skills that you can implement to handle some of the anxiety as it comes up. So this is mainly and primarily for people who are not, who are not in that place where they need to go to therapy for anxiety, because all of us can get overwhelmed, whether we struggle with anxiety or not. We can get overwhelmed still. And so there are definitely fixes. So consider, how many things are you feeling uncertain about right now? And are there any things that you could move from uncertainty to certainty? If there are, then go take care of those things right now. I will wait here. Please go and handle that thing right now. If there is an easy, low-hanging fruit, go grab that, get it done, get it off your plate, and there will be no more uncertainty about that thing. And then the overwhelm won't be as big. So start there. Start with the easiest things to get off your plate. Start with the easiest things to find certainty about. Are you waiting to make plane reservations? Go do it. Are you waiting to make a hotel reservation? Go do it. Are you waiting to start a book because it feels big? Open the manuscript right now. Write the first sentence. Go find a first sentence from an old book that you've written and put that first sentence down there, and then just keep going. Like, let yourself get over the threshold of the action. And you can erase the sentence, it'll be fine. But the key is, when it feels like there's too much uncertainty, you have to pick something to find certainty about in order to help the overwhelm to go away. So that's the first big part. The reason that I talk about overwhelm and intuition, just to kind of circle back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, is that an awful lot of intuition comes from very quick decision-making processes that happen in our head. And when we are overwhelmed, it's often because there's a lot of intuitive processes trying to make decisions about things and or process information. And there's just too much that's happening. So even our intuition can get clouded, like the way that we make decisions can get clouded when there's too much uncertainty. So the first thing we want to do is to solve as much of the uncertainty as we can, and to handle as much of the overwhelm as is possible. One of the things we're going to do in the upcoming videos, because I do think this was a very important interview that I did, is we're going to release a video about anxiety and writers, and we're going to talk to a diagnosed and generalized anxiety disorder writer about anxiety and how they handle that. And so I want to talk about that as well in this series. And we're going to cover all kinds of things: marketing, plotting, all kinds of different things that have to do with intuition. But I wanted to start off discussing overwhelm, because I do feel like intuitive writers get overwhelmed a lot, just because we tend to want to take a lot of information in and then read a lot of patterns. Again, it's the see the data, make connections between the data, and then make meaning out of that, make meaning out of those connections. So when we have that process and it happens so quickly, we can get overwhelmed when there's just too much coming at us. So again, Like, let's solve that problem as much as we can. Go do something for certainty. Consider not being somewhere online tomorrow morning for as long as you can. Consider putting the phone in the drawer. Consider not going on social media sites or not opening your podcast app or your YouTube app or whatever. Just consider it tomorrow and see if it helps with some of the anxiety to just not be assaulted at all times by information and shoulds. Just see if it helps. Experiment. Okay. I could keep talking about this, unfortunately, for about another 2 or 3 hours. Oh, there's too much to say. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to come back in the next episode and we're going to talk a little bit more about intuition over the next month. If you haven't yet pre-ordered the Dear Writer, Are You Intuitive book, you can. We'll put a link in the show notes. And I hope this was helpful. Please ask questions if you have them, especially if you need clarity about something or if you have a specific question about a specific type of missing out or something, because some of you have tried in the past to do no phone in the morning or to not go on social media sites. And there's a, but I can't part that has to do with either like, I have to check on my children on my phone, or I have to, I need that social contact first thing in the morning or something like that. So there's almost always some nuance to these things that we talk about. And so I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions in the comments if you would like to. Otherwise, again, please do pre-order the Dear Writer, Are You Intuitive book. It comes out at the end of April. We are very excited about it. It's going to the editor soon. So I'm always happy about that. I mean, it's not soon enough. Like I still have days of writing left, which is what I'm off to do right now. So if you want to join me, I'm going to go onto our Discord channel. I'm going to be on our Patreon office quite a bit, hopefully in the next couple of days, trying to get some writing done and use a little bit of social pressure to finish this book. And so I hope that all of you have a great day writing, and I will see you on the next QuitCast. Bye.